We're so happy to have you here this morning. So tell us a little bit about what got you into journalism.
Well, that's a long story because I just wanted a lot of attention when I was a little kid, and that made me give all the benedictions and the invocations at every school function, because I came from a school of 108, a town of 108 people. So it was a small town. And so I got into broadcasting just to be famous. Then I got smacked with serious events that were happening around me. And somewhere along the line, I turned into a journalist. And so I went to the back seat. The ego went to the back seat. And the public's need to know serious things became foremost. It is the difference between a watchdog and a guard dog. A watchdog just barks when someone comes to the gate, and it doesn't make a determination whether that is a burglar or the postal server. The guard dog just bites anybody that comes in the gate. I don't bite anybody that comes into the gate. I just bark and let the people come outside, make a determination for themselves whether something needs to have an action taken. So I suppose I could wrap that into a package by saying the journalist's job is to say to the public, know this and proceed, not tell them how to proceed. And if you wanted to say something in the area of climate change, you would say, here are the facts. Now take these facts and do with them what you will. You can have a free market solution if you want to be conservative, or you can have a government mandated solution if you want to be very liberal about it. It doesn't matter to me as a journalist how that happens. But down the road, we'll talk about why one is better than the other in this case, because of the timeline and the deadline we're currently on, because the global deadline for solving this problem is very short. The Sustainable Development Goals set 2030 for even 2C, and the 1.5C, which is the actual recommended number, requires that we do something so quickly that we cannot wait for a private company to scale an economy to figure out how to solve our problem. We have to solve the problem now before we reach a tipping point and it's too late to solve the problem.
Prior, you were talking about journalism and its role in climate change and how it's communicating climate change. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the challenges you see with journalism and climate change and the science with it?
Journalism and the construct of journalism, the way you're taught, which is a fine way to teach journalism, of a three-legged stool, if you will imagine, that in order to establish yourself as being someone who is telling as close to an objective truth as possible, you are concentrating on the accuracy of your statement, the fairness of your statement, and that you're providing balance in your statement. You're doing that because no human being is born objective. We all come from different backgrounds. We come from different schools. We're different genders. We're different colors. We all have different experiences, so we can't be flatly objective when we're asked to go observe something. I can go see something, an event, and I will have an impression of that event. And a young woman may go and see that. A young woman, let's say of color, goes and sees the same event I saw and will come away with a completely different impression, which each of us will believe are objective. But unless you run it through this filter of accuracy, fairness, and balance, and test each one of your statements against that test, then you're coming close to what can be called an artificial objectivity. Not a human objectivity, but an imposed artificial objectivity. That's a good thing. But it also makes you lazy. And I mean that in this sense. There are many journalists alive, and certainly young journalists did this all along, and some of them never grew out of it. And that is, they take the balance part of that and say, I know how to cover this story quickly. I will spend 30 seconds with a person who says, yes, I saw this person rob a bank. And then I'll spend 30 seconds with a person who said, no, it wasn't that person who robbed a bank. And then I will put a story on the air, or I will print that in a newspaper or put it in a blog, and feel like I've done my job as a journalist. Two different points of view, equally balanced, both of them accurate from the point of view of the individual speaking, but both can't be accurate. One of them is accurate. If one is accurate, it may be somebody else entirely. And your job as a journalist is to find out who it really was. Was it one of the two people mentioned, or was it another person entirely? But a journalist relaxes when they feel like they've gotten both sides of a story, when in fact there are not two sides of any story. There may be 50 sides to any given story. But if a journalist gets two, one saying yes, one saying no, they feel comfortable they have done it. And they do that when they don't know how to find the truth of the matter. So, in the early days of climate change, when it was called global warming, which I still from time to time call it global warming because I understand that the planet is warming and the climate is changing as a result of that. So I don't cleave to some of the people who say, don't ever call it global warming. It is global warming. The climate is changing as a result of that, and I try to explain that along the way, that it wasn't a switch made for any particular political reason. But when I started reporting on it, I didn't report on it saying, here's somebody who says it does exist, and here's someone who says it doesn't exist. Because before I started, I added up all the peer-reviewed literature and all of the science that had been established and all the modeling that had gone on. And then I looked at this smaller group that said, no, it's not happening. And then further investigated who they were being paid by, who they were working for, what were their politics, what was in it for them to say this set of facts is untrue when the bulk of science said it was true. And so it began, that's why I called myself an investigative climate reporter, because I wanted to chase the money. I wanted to find out why people were disagreeing over something as simple as 2 + 2 is 4. I just don't believe you can disagree over that. That science reaches conclusions after using this methodology that science has always used, which is sort of like the methodology that journalists should be using. You don't go into an experiment saying, this is what I expect to find. You go into an experiment saying, I don't know what I'm going to find, but I'm going to keep testing until I can get something that is replicable and I can put my trust in that. And that's what journalists should be doing, and journalists have failed to do it. Journalists have failed to do it because, quite frankly, and I hate to say this about my own profession, and I hope this doesn't sound like an old fuddy-duddy and sour grapes, but most journalists don't have any science background. They don't understand how to figure out a probability theory or statistical analysis or how to do modeling. They don't understand physics. They don't understand chemistry. And so they have to rely on experts. And the experts they find sometimes don't fit. And I'll give you an example of one I saw the other day that just nearly blew the top of my head off. A Nobel laureate climate scientist was speaking about some very serious issues about the changes in our atmosphere. using the laws of physics to explain it. The person they were using as the counterbalance on the other side was an economist, not another scientist, not someone who could say, no, I think your science is wrong. I think at least you could have a discussion about that, but it would be very simple to defeat the person who said your science is wrong, because it is established science. It is the 2 + 2 = 4, and this one is saying 2 + 2 = 5. You know that's not true. But they had an economist arguing with a scientist. And I just thought that's the worst kind of journalism in the world. You're arguing apples and bananas. One saying it's happening, and the other saying, no, it's not. And even if it is, it's going to be too expensive to fix.
So let's dig a little bit deeper
Yes.
into those that are actually consuming the news and information. So it's really interesting that you were mentioning how to find the truth of the matter, how to go to the heart of it and discover and get true insight. Everyone is entitled to their own opinions. They're not entitled to their own facts. And that's what you're basically saying. That's what I'm hearing you say.
Well, I disagree with you, if you don't mind.
Not at all.
You mind?
Please, not at all.
I don't think you're entitled to your own opinion.
Okay.
I think opinion in this world is ascendant. Opinion has gotten to the point that it is equal in value in public converse, in debate, to a fact. How I feel about a subject is important as the fact that you are presenting. I can say, I don't feel good about what you're saying, so therefore I'm not accepting what you're saying, because my opinion is you're wrong. No one ever says, no journalist ever says, well, what are your facts that will counter this argument? But they don't have facts. They only have feelings. Sean Lawrence Otto wrote a wonderful book, and in it he quotes John Locke, one of the great British writers of all time, saying, anything but the truth is but faith or belief. And in the subject of climate change, we have to take faith and belief out of it. I want people to have faith and belief. I'm not against people with faith and belief. But you can't have faith and belief. You cannot believe that gravity doesn't exist. You can't believe that. You can't be allowed to believe that. You can't be allowed to exist in a universe where gravity doesn't exist. You're going to die in that universe because you're going to throw something up in the air and then it's going to come down and crush you. Because that's how gravity works. No matter how much you believe, it doesn't work that way. So I don't like that we have given the public the right to say, I don't agree, but that's just my opinion, against the presentation of irrefutable, peer-reviewed fact. I just don't like it, and I don't like the ascendancy of the opinion having the same value as fact.
So to finish that thought, how should journalists message to the public if there is the ascendancy of opinion over fact? Are they to educate them, inform them, provide them with information for them to make a decision? Because climate change is something that people feel they have an opinion around.
Yes.
So how would you think, as a journalist, the journalist should communicate?
Journalists have part of their brain would probably be described as sociologists, because they have to understand and measure what an audience is thinking about and how it behaves under certain circumstances. And so when you ask an individual and present the information to people, you have to let them know that this is not a matter of opinion, that you simply can't have an opinion. You can have facts. If you want to counter a fact, bring in another fact. It's a court of law, if you will. And it is a test that is, in the United States, we have the criminal courts and we have the civil courts. And criminal courts operate under reasonable doubt standard and moral certainty, it used to be. And then civil courts, is it more likely or not, where's the preponderance of the evidence? And they decide based on the preponderance of evidence. And it's still a factual basis. We have a civil discussion. If people were able to sit as a jury and you look at this audience and say, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we're going to select 12 individuals to sit on this panel. Please may I see a show of hands of people who have already formed an opinion. Now, people who have very strict opinions would never sit on a jury because they have to fairly look at evidence without having already decided who was guilty or who was innocent in a case, or who was responsible in a civil case, or who was negligent. But what often happens on that portion of courts called voir dire, where they get to question the prospective juror, the juror would say, I've already reached an opinion that this person did wrong. The judge will say, one of the two sides will say, I move to strike this juror from the panel. And the judge will say, just a moment, I have a question. If presented with the evidence, even though you have already previously formed an opinion, once you see the evidence, could you arrive at a conclusion different than the opinion you currently hold? And if they say, well, yeah, if I saw the evidence, I could. And the judge says, seat the juror. If we learn that what we have to do as human beings in a society all over the planet is look at the facts and remove our opinion from the matter and fairly measure the facts before us, then we can arrive at a decent solution. Once we all get on board the fact train.
Okay, so talk with us a little bit about the presentation of the facts and scientists' abilities to communicate the facts.
Scientists are extremely good at speaking to scientists. For years and years and years, scientists had to speak to other scientists to get their funding. Not long ago, scientists had to reverse that. They had to convince a public, in essence, to fund research. And it was a very difficult task because they speak a language that only scientists understand. Most of the public didn't do very well in chemistry. Most of the public didn't do very well in physics. Most of the people don't understand the scientific method, even though it has been argued between 90 and 94% of all legislation that ever comes before anybody for a decision is based in science of some kind. Mathematics, statistics, probability theory, medicines, healthcare, every kind of thing that is headline stories today have scientific components in it. And we're asking people with absolutely no background, including the journalists, in these sciences to break down these facts for us. Well, when I've gone around the country, and I work for a number of different organizations that work directly with scientists to help in the communication process. And I don't want to give up any secrets, but it's very simple. When you're speaking to a scientist, sometimes you say, have you ever heard of a metaphor? Have you ever heard of a simile? The way human beings have learned from ancient times, when the first hominid walked the earth and developed the ability to speak, was the oral tradition and was telling a story. They weren't telling a litany of facts and expecting people to understand those facts. And so I think that what we need is scientists who can tell stories and start, in essence, once upon a time. Once upon a time, there were people, and this is what they did. And it doesn't have to be something that would be developed for children, but it needs to be something that is developed for people of moderate education to be able to hear and understand. So, oh, I see. Now I'll give you an example. There was a case, and it was developed out of the National Atmospheric Research Council. It was developed along with Kevin Trenberth and a number of other people. And the question was, I'm going on a conservative radio show, and there had been an outbreak of tornadoes in around Springfield, Missouri, and it killed a number of people. And the person is going to ask me, as a scientist, were these tornadoes caused by climate change? And the answer would be, from a scientist, there's no way to know that. That would be a scientific answer. I don't know. I have no idea whether there is. That's a perfectly good scientific answer. I have no evidence that that happened. What do I say? Because that's going to get broadcast around the world that the head of this National Atmospheric Research Center is saying, no, there's no evidence of climate change effect on the outbreak of tornadoes. I said, well, how about saying, have you ever heard of Barry Bonds? Now, in the United States, everybody who ever watched television or ever cared about baseball knows exactly who Barry Bonds is. Took steroids and came into the league as a kid who could hit 35 home runs from the day he took the plate as a rookie. Was Rookie of the Year. Hit 35 home runs for a number of years straight. One of the biggest power hitters ever. Then he started taking steroids, and it went from 35 to, I'm going to just make this up, 35 to 42 to 47 to 58 to 59 to 63 to 72 to 70. And then it just kept going up because he was taking steroids. Now, if someone were to ask a scientist, is the outbreak of the tornadoes in Springfield, Missouri, the result of climate change, is the same question of asking a physician, was the home run that Barry Bonds hit in Chicago on August 16th of 1997 caused by steroids? Well, he'd have to say, I haven't the slightest idea. He's already capable of hitting 35 home runs. It could have been just natural background variation. He could have just done that. But because the trend line is going up on the number of home runs he's hitting since he started taking steroids, I can tell you to a certainty that there is a statistical relationship, an anomaly, that there are more home runs being hit. So the chances are that home run, the chances are to a 97% certainty, 40% more likely that he hit that as a result of steroids. Now that's a scientific explanation why Barry Bonds hit a home run on the 16th of August in Chicago. And it wouldn't satisfy anyone. But when he says this, Barry Bonds hit an unusual amount of home runs when he started juicing. And we are seeing more unusual weather events in the same trend line since we started juicing the atmosphere. All right. There's a story that someone tells that goes to every human being who can now understand exactly what they're talking about. That if you do this, this is going to happen. We know if you do this, if you put steroids into Barry Bonds' body, he's going to hit more home runs. If you put more CO2 and water vapor in the atmosphere, you're going to have more tornadoes. Not all the tornadoes, because there's always going to be tornadoes. That's the background noise, just like the 35 home runs that Barry Bonds was hitting. So I thought that was a wonderful, wonderful thing. I had nothing to do with that. That came out, but that's exactly the way scientists should be speaking. They're saying they should be saying a simile. It's like this, and then relate it to someone's own home life. Where they go, oh, I get that. I don't have to learn chemistry to understand reasonableness. And science is, if anything, reasonable.
So let's talk about unreasonable.
Yeah.
Fake news. And
Yes.
So let's talk about journalism, PR, and fake news. Just a little bit of a trajectory there. Not that there's this ascendancy of PR, public relations, spinning,
Yes.
and positioning reality in a certain way, and then the extreme of fake news that you just make up whatever you want without any basis. How do individuals who are consuming, interacting with information, know how to discern among these?
Oh, that's the simplest answer in the world.
Wonderful.
In a professional journalist's life, if they were to, let's say they went to college for 7 years, they got a master's degree in journalism. They took their parents' money, they promised they were going to do well, they get a job in a small market, they report the facts, they do what they can do, they get a reputation, they go to the next market, the next market, next market. Pretty soon they're working for the New York Times, or they're working for the Washington Post, or they're working for NBC or CBS or ABC, maybe Fox. And they build a family, and they've got 3 children and a husband or a wife, and their whole life is dependent upon the money they earn telling the objective truth. And one day they decide, I'm going to lie. I'm just going to put something that is absolutely, demonstrably false on the air or in a newspaper. For whatever reason they might, I'm going to do that. If it is found out, they will be summarily fired, and they will never get another job again as long as they live. Now, I have a 55-year background plus add 200 years of research in American journalism. No one can knowingly tell a falsehood in the mainstream media in journalism. That doesn't mean bloggers can't lie. That doesn't mean that people who are hacking into Facebook can't lie. It doesn't mean that someone who's sitting in the basement who calls themselves a journalist doing research, they can't lie, because they're not going to get fired. So when people ask me, who should we trust? My answer is very simple. Trust the people who will be fired if they ever lie to you. And that's very simple to know. It's the people who have been in the trenches for years and are working for organs that stand up and say, you can trust us to tell you the truth. It may not even be politically fashionable, but we're going to tell you the hard news because that's our job. We're going to tell you things that you may not like. It may cause our ratings to fall off or our circulation to fall off, but it's our obligation to the Bill of Rights of the Constitution of the United States of America to tell you what you need to know so that you can exercise your franchise in the next election. And that's why the United States has never had a coup d'etat. That's why it's never had a revolution since the revolution to separate from England. It's never had one, and the answer is very simple. Do you know why we've never had one? Because we put it on the calendar. Every 2 years, the first Tuesday, we have a revolution. We know people want to revolt. So here's your outlet. You can throw the bums out of office. You can do whatever you want to do. And they have done it.
And so, with your 30 years of covering climate change, what do people need to know?
That based on what we know of the science, based not just the science of atmospheric CO2 and other greenhouse gases, but the downstream effects of that, how that affects flooding, how that affects weather patterns, how it affects agronomy, how it affects the ability to grow food, how it affects the mobility of individuals to leave, how it affects climate refugees. Because there are so many tentacles of the effects of climate change that we need to know that this is an existential threat, that no one is making this up. There is no reason to make this up. There are reasons why people will tell you it's not true, but they have a motivation to tell you why it's not true. It's the Upton Sinclair line from The Jungle, that it is difficult to make a man understand when his livelihood depends on him not understanding. So if there are people who make a career out of mining coal, or they and their families have for centuries mining coal, and God bless them, it helped build the economy of America in the Industrial Revolution, and then oil was discovered and it put lots of people to work, and there are whole states of just 75% of their population get their incomes from fossil fuels. Well, they have a reason to say, don't put us out of business. We won't be able to send our children to the doctor. I understand why people would say, I am opposed to the science that says this is going to happen to me. And if I become one of those, I am going to be a pariah in my own community if I become one who believes. So I'm going to do everything I can to say it's not happening. That's one group of people. There's another group of people who deny because they are petrified that it may be true. And what it means that they're going to have to do in their lives, how they're going to have to radically change. There are those who say, all this is a method for government to become larger and to mandate the behavior and to take over the lives of every human being in the country or in the world and say, you must do these things. And there are people who are frightened of government overreach and getting into the lives of individuals. We'll never get anywhere unless we understand why there are those who oppose the science. We need to extend a hand to those instead of saying, you're a bunch of Luddites, or you're a bunch of idiots, or you're stupid. That doesn't help anything. but to say, I understand why you feel that way. But you have to understand as well that here are the facts. Here are the 2 apples and the 2 apples that add up to 4 apples. No matter what you say, you can't make them add up to 5. And I understand, so let's figure out some solutions to make your life less fearful. So scaring people to death is not the answer. Providing hope, and hope abounds right now because business has caught on to the idea that there is an economy out there waiting to exploit and make lots of people rich. In the same way that disruptive technology was true when the poor person who sold typewriters and repaired them, they went out of business when computers and word processors went into every office. But I happen to know a person who was a typewriter repair person when I see it coming, and went on and learned computer repair work, and he was right back in the office a year later fixing the computers. Yeah, disruptive things change, and people are resistant to change, but if we're going to save the planet from an existential threat, then we're going to have to do some things to change. We can't be comfortable saying things are always going to be the way they are. We will have to make some changes. We're going to have to waste less, which is an interesting thing because Republicans and Democrats in America both agree that waste is wrong. One says government waste is wrong, wasting government taxpayer money, that's wrong. And other people saying wasting natural resources is wrong. But you can't thump half the Bible. If you hate waste, you hate waste wherever you find it. And I think it's an inflection point for discussion for both sides to come together and say, we can agree on this. Let's not waste anything else. It is a highly conservative principle not to waste. My parents were conservatives, and they didn't waste a thing. They would never throw away anything that could be made into something else. They would not waste gasoline by driving somewhere they didn't need to go. They knew it cost money to put gasoline in the tank. They were very conservative. And so when I speak to conservative groups, I go, what happened? What happened to you? How did you take the CAFE standards, the mileage standards of automobiles, and get on the wrong side of your own thinking on that by opposing the increase in the ability of cars to go longer distances on less fuel that you would have to buy? And you tried to stop that from happening. And the Democrats were saying, well, no, let's try to figure out how to build cars, electric cars, and hybrid electric cars, or cars with engines that are more efficient. How did you let the Democrats steal a conservative value like that from you? And they scratched their heads. I don't know how we did that. I don't know how that happened. But I do know how it happened because the people in the Congress of the United States of America are getting elected because of the amount of money being put into their coffers by people who have a need to keep the status quo. And I hate to say this about an institution I love and a history of that institution I love, but in the last 20 years, I don't see it so much as campaign contributions anymore from corporate entities. It's more like bribery. And I hate to say that. But I think it could be established that representatives of the people are not representing the people in their best interest, but they're representing what they think are the best interests of the individual corporations who get them vast amounts of money to get reelected.
So, as we sort of draw this to a close, what can you recommend to individuals in this environment that you've just described, with science pointing towards what is happening around climate change, some of the challenges that governments are facing and those in power are facing in terms of vested interest? What are the things that you think they should be hopeful around, and what can they focus on? How can they discover the truth? It's a lot of work, it sounds like, to ask the right questions, know the sources to go to, be able to compare it. What should they have hope around? You said there's a lot of hope. Would you be able to articulate that?
A story. When Henry Ford invented for the United States the automobile and put it into assembly line and wanted everyone to have a car, he employed hundreds of thousands of people, many of them who had been previously out of work, and put them on the assembly line and had to make cars. But it met with remarkable protests in the streets, violent protests. Do you know who the protesters were? You'll laugh.
Horse and buggy people.
Buggy whip makers. The men and women who made buggy whips because they were going to be without jobs. But as the auto industry grew, they were absorbed, and they built unions, and they had a better life than they ever had as buggy whip makers. Disruptions come in fits and starts, but they always are better for us in the end. But it requires these notions that our life has been planned out and this is the way it's always going to be. That is an antiquated notion. The average child today will have 9 careers, not 9 jobs, 9 different careers. That's how fast the world's changing. They will have a job at the end of their working life at 65 or 70 that they hadn't imagined existed when they got into the workforce. So I think we're in a place in history where we have to grow as people, saying, the world is changing quickly and I had better be pretty facile. I ought to be prepared to learn and move with the times and go where the money is and learn the skills it will take to be a productive human being and not do the same thing my great-great-grandfather did, because those days are ending.
So adapting is important.
There are 3 terms that we use in talking about climate change: adaptation, resilience, and mediation. These are just like accuracy and fairness and balance for journalists. For people working in the social scheme of climate change future: adaptation, resilience, and mediation. Mediation means you stop that which is causing the problem. So a transition away from carbon-based fuels, from molecules to electrons, and lowering the amount of CO2 and greenhouse gases you're putting into the atmosphere and killing people, poisoning them. And I'm convinced that when we see that kind of thing happen, the job market begins to explode into the fastest growing sector in our economy for employment is right now: windmill turbine repair. More people are going to school and being hired just to fix turbines on windmills. the fastest growing segment. But nobody sees that. Nobody sees that. Young people see it. But a person who has been working in a coal field, they won't look at it. They won't even look at that possibility that they could be making 3 times the amount of money that they're making right now if they just spent some time figuring out how to repair a turbine. That's mediation, stopping the problem. Resilience is knowing that because we have already done some damage to this planet, that we will have to create a way of being more resilient as human beings, maybe even as climate refugees. We may have to move to a different place. We may have to take up our home at a place we had not intended to, move away from our families because our families will also move away. I was down in Louisiana a couple of years ago at the Mississippi River Delta Institute, and they said 40% of Louisiana is going to be gone by 27 because it's just sinking into the ocean and the sea level is rising at the same time. And the paradoxes are crazy in a situation like that, because part of the reason it's sinking is because they're drawing out all of the oil from the subsurface of the earth and the water that is used, and so the subsidence is happening, and so, but they will not get away from an oil economy. Yet they're killing themselves. They're doing things against their best interest, and America, if it is known for anything, it should be known for that we often vote against our best interest. If it means we have an immediate paycheck. The same thing is true for opening up the Barents Sea or opening up drilling in the Arctic Ocean, because it's ice-free much of the time, so you could put up and drill some oil. Well, stupid, it's ice-free because you pumped so much oil and put it into the sky that it melted the ice. Do you realize what you're doing? You're changing your planet for an immediate gain. I cleave to and it may be apocryphal, but it's said often enough that I believe it's true, and I want it to be true, that the Native Americans would say in council, when they would meet and decide what to do in a certain circumstance, and everybody gave their opinion, whatever decision that they made had to be a good decision for 7 generations hence. That was their guiding principle. Not what is good for us at this moment. The decision we make today has to be a good decision for the 7th generation of us. And we're not used to thinking that way because of the immediate gratification that we've gotten into and the materialism we've gotten into. And I'm not a sociologist in that regard or an anthropologist in that regard, but I just think it's really smart if Congress were to meet and say, we're going to pass a law because we're thinking about 7 generations from now. Wouldn't that be a wonderful thing to hear? And the last one then, so we have mediation on one side, resiliency, that's hardening what we know is going to come. Sea level rise is going to come. If we stop right now putting gigatons of CO2 in the atmosphere, we'll still get sea level rise because the CO2 is going to hang around in the atmosphere for a long time. We're still going to get flooding because we've got 4%, we've got more than 4%, but we've got so much more water vapor in a closed hydrological system that will just dump itself in places it's never dumped before, and not dump itself where it's supposed to dump itself, like the Great Plains, so we can have stuff to eat and grow grain. There are some arguments that could even be desertified over time, which is can you imagine that somebody in Eritrea watches a television commercial of American children starving? I mean, we watch, late night television The children of Eritrea are starving again, and please send money to this hope chest so that we can feed the hungry. But if the Great Plains, the breadbasket of the world, begins to be affected by climate change to the point that the soil horizons don't grow grass anymore, don't grow grains anymore, the Ogallala Aquifer runs dry, we can't put any water into the thing. So resilience, we have to figure out how we're going to survive no matter what. Adaptation, while other people love adaptation, I don't like adaptation because that sounds like you just gave up. I'm just going to adapt like you could adapt. But you look at evolutionary changes in so much of our biome and animals that have disappeared from the earth because it happened so quickly they didn't have time to evolve. So I'm not really fond of the term adaptation, but it's still in there, and there's still people working on adaptive methodologies for dealing with this. But I'm sanguine. I hate the moment we're in. It's like being in a war, but I see peace ahead. I see a way that we can solve this when everyone finally goes, all right, we better do something. My problem as a journalist is that they will reach that conclusion too late. One of my favorite quotes, and it's not apocryphal, it was an actual quote, and I give him the right to say this. Winston Churchill, mother was an American, father British, so I give him the right to say what he said. He said, and I'll butcher this quote, but he said, "America will always do the right thing after it's tried everything else first." And we just don't have the time to wait until we've tried everything else. We have to do something quickly and with cohesion and with the full support of every American based on the evidence before us right now, the inescapable evidence, the overwhelming amount of evidence. I cannot fathom anyone today who can say climate change is a hoax. I just can't fathom that, because first question is, show me the evidence that it's a hoax. Show me that they're lying. Show me the science is not true. Show me the physics is not true. Show me the model is not true. And on Twitter, I was talking to my daughter the other day, and she said she got off Twitter because she was finding there are people who were former deniers who go on Twitter and say, I now believe. And they open themselves up to the most awful comments on Twitter about how stupid they were. And my daughter said, I want to welcome them. And that's the way we need to be. We just can't be us and the other. We have to be us. The whole globe has to be us, working toward a common goal.
A lovely way to end. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Can we grab a photo with you?
Sure.
Oh, this was so fantastic.